So Bob, I'm like excited because there's like tons tons of coaches message me that how lucky I am to learn from you. I
Oh,
feel
get
that.
out of here. You're making that up, man. You're
No,
making
no,
that.
no. I literally screenshot all those, so I'm lucky. And yeah, I am. So can you like
I'm
introduce
lucky
yourself a little
to spend another podcast with Eric, the performance guy, my new friend, my dude, my
bit?
brother from another mother.
Thanks, thanks. So can you like introduce yourself for the audience?
I'm Coach Bob Thurnhoffer, personal friend to Eric, the performance guy at University of Louisville. We're both Cardinals and we're partners in crime. But no, no. But yeah, it's I'm assistant coach at University of Louisville track and field. Been there about 4 months. I'm only coaching the jumps at Louisville, so long jump, high jump, triple jump, which is kind of new for me. Haven't done that as a full-time coach, and so yeah, kind of nice to like narrow down the events I'm coaching for the first time in my career. But yeah, it's been good. Really, really good group. I mean, we got three 26-foot guys on the team, a 7'5" and a 7'3" high jumper, a couple 52-foot triple jump guys, and a really good crew of women's jumpers as well, 21-footer and a really strong group of women's triplers. So yeah, really fun group to work with as you've times, Eric, and gotten to know those guys pretty well. And then, but yeah, prior to that, like last time we did the podcast, I was at the University of New Mexico. So last 2 years, I was at the University of New Mexico where I coached pretty much every event under the sun. So yeah, I did the long sprints, long hurdles, short hurdles, long jump, triple jump, combined events, javelin. I dabbled in some 800-meter training with the guy. So kind of really everything just about. And so, and then prior to that, I spent almost my entire career at Loyola University Chicago, where yeah, spend about 12 years training in primarily in a 35-meter hallway of rollout track. And so, that's where I kind of quote unquote cut my teeth and I really attribute that to like being the fundamental learning experience or that was like my mentor. I didn't really have a mentor as a coach. I certainly had a lot of influences, but not like a strict mentor. And I feel like training for 12 years in a hyper restricted environment of a 35-meter hallway of rollout track with no sandpit or anything really was really what that's what forced me to grow more than anything. And it was immensely difficult to work in for so long, but kind of looking back on it, I view it as like I wouldn't there's no way I'd be who I am without that experience. It was such a unique and such a long experience that really really pushed me to like find to be creative and search for all the best possible methods to develop speed power athletes. And um, so yeah, now I basically hang out at Louisville, coach jumpers, and then hang out with the men's basketball strength staff, i.e. Eric the performance guy and Adam Petway and Gio and Nate. That's my crew now. So yeah.
Nice, nice, nice. So I know it kind of like discussed this before,
Yep.
but also I talked to a lot of like chat coaches or like performance coaches, strength coach, whatever. And usually all the coaches have like some sort of mentor and they kind of follow their path or kind of follow their philosophy.
Right.
But one thing I think I really enjoy spending time with you or really enjoy watching you coach your athlete or
Mhm.
do your program is like you mentioned, you don't have really a mentor, so you can't implement everything you learn.
Right.
And but what I saw is like some people like if they want to implement everything later, it's gonna be chaos. But what I saw is like you know how to put things together and you know what is best for athletes. So
Mhm.
can we talk a little about it?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I'd say I think like fundamentally or philosophically, if you will, I think when I was at Loyola, like each like successive year, I think there's like part of me that was try there's like part of me that's trying to figure out the best possible methods to improve while I'm in the parameters of a 35-meter hallway for the majority of the year. So there's that. And then I'm also trying to think of the best possible methods to individualized training and keep athletes healthy, right? And so it's sort of like those things were that's what like motivated me. But then I was in this like pressure cooker of a situation where I just had there's so many things that I couldn't do. And so I had to figure out the ways to maximize what I could do, you know? And so so yeah, so I'd say like, yeah, I don't have like a strict mentor that I called every week or anything like that. I mean, I have very intense influences. Like I went through the USTF CCCA coaching curriculum. I did the jump specialist with Boo and Todd Lane. I did the combined events specialist with Jim and Chris Grimes. I've done the masters endorsement jumps with it was with Todd Lane and Nick Peterson. And so I've done all that curriculum. So that's like a huge influence on me, but it's not like I'm talking to Boo every week or anything like that. Like I'm cool with Boo. I mean, I consider him a friend, but I talk to him maybe 2 or 3 times a year or something like that, right? And so I wouldn't say he's like a mentor necessarily. Um, so yeah, so I like I guess with that motivation of trying to like push the boundaries of what I can how I can maximize that 35-meter hallway. It just pushed me to read all the books I could, do all the online courses I could, uh find a way to get into a seminar with Franz Bosch in one of the few times he actually came to the US. So I was able to do that in 2018. I spent a week with Joseph Coyne back in 2018 as well the only reason I got to know about it is through a friend of mine, Keith Hurston, mentioned it to me, but it was only like 20 coaches there. It was a very small, intimate setting. And so learned so much there. And obviously listening to podcasts like this, you know, I listened to endless amounts of that. And then honestly, maybe the most important thing I did is uh I after every single practice at Loyola, whether it's at Loyola, whether it's a jumps practice, a sprints practice, a hurdles practice, a javelin practice, whatever, or at New Mexico, or even here at Louisville, after every practice I've ever done, even to this day, uh, I write very extensive notes about like what you know, I think as coaches, we can be really hard on ourselves. So, you know, I think it's easy to think like, oh, I did this wrong. Oh, this was terrible or that was bad. So it's always important you have to identify areas you can improve on, but you have to also acknowledge like, hey, I kind of nailed that, you know, like this part of the practice that's a great, like, I'm keeping with that. And I'm going to think about ways to kind of tinker with it and progress it. And so that's what I do. I do like a self audit every single day about like what went good, what went bad, what would I do with this athlete, what would I do with that athlete? How can I make some individualized nuances to training without, like you said, without it becoming way too chaotic where I'm trying to juggle 35 things at once. It's easy to get too lost in details where you're doing too much, right? And so that's where I think like a lot of learning from my own personal mistakes and learning what I feel in my core philosophy of training is most important to address. I think like over time and experience and copious note taking and just constant learning and adjusting. That's where like you can learn to apply these different methods and philosophies of training into like a cohesive whole. And so so I'm always learning and I'm always adjusting, but I think like over time, as the more I've learned, the more I've refined my process of training and programming and philosophy of training. It's just gotten cleaner and cleaner. But yeah, I think I do like incorporate a lot of what I learned from Franz Bosch is a big one. Certainly incorporate a ton of his training. But Boo is probably my biggest influence. So that's probably at the top of my influence, but certainly I've learned a ton from Joseph Coyne, and I've listened to like everything Randy Huntington has ever put out. And so that's a huge influence on me as well. And then a lot of it is just like my own like thinking about methods and like finding my own methods or experimenting with things. And for every 10 ideas I have, nine of them are BS, and then one of them I might strike gold with, and that's where that constant refining of methods comes in. And so yeah, I think like having a core philosophy of training is key, but then you have to kind of like tweak that for the athletes that I work with. And so like if I'm doing a coordination based strength activity at the end of say a speed session, I could have everyone do max velocity switches as that activity, but I might have Jake do one form of it that adds a little bit more instability because I know he can handle it because I've worked with him for over a year. But then maybe like a more developmental athlete like Jaden, for example, freshman. Like this is all entirely new to him. He's never done this before. It's going to be a lot more simplistic version of it, right? And so you can make individualized tweaks in a very simple, easy format. Like you don't have to write a totally different program. You can just make adjustments to the same activity everyone is doing, and that's fairly easy to administer.
Good. And before I dive into training, the other thing I want to ask about is like basically this is our first year of Louisville.
Yeah, yeah.
And
We came in at the same time.
yeah, and all of those jumpers love you, man. All those different athletes, they think about this. They gone through like different coaches in four
Yeah,
years.
yeah. They've had a
And
lot of
yeah,
changeover.
but when you came, they love you. So how and I'm an outsider. Although I constantly like watch how you coach,
Yeah,
I'm there
yep.
and see how you interact with those athletes. But how how did you like you this is like first few months and
Right.
the athlete love you. How did you do that?
Yeah, I don't. I think I still got a ways to go in that department, but I appreciate that sentiment. Obviously means a lot, but yeah, I think like when you think about that, like in terms of team culture, like that coach athlete relationship, to me, like I'd say a couple things. I mean, to me, it's very sacred. Like I'm not a religious person, but I'm very big on human relationships and caring for other people and empathy and being able to put yourself in the shoes of another person. I think that's really important, and it's lost. I think people lose that with each successive year. Like, people aren't aware or don't have that kind of like thought process about like, hey, let me think of what it's like to be in this person's shoes. And so that's really it's like a sacred thing to me. If I'm coaching you, it's very deep to me. And so I think it's like a personal philosophy of mine to think that way and to act that way. Actions speak louder than words, right? And um, but honestly, more than that, it's just like I think a lot of the time you see coaches like have their own like coaching personality where they put on their coaching hat and they become coach so and so at practice, but then when you see them outside of practice, they're sort of like someone else. I'm just saying this is who I am. Like whether I'm at practice or I'm on a podcast with Eric the performance guy, or I'm getting coffee with Adam and talking shop or whatever. I'm really just like the same guy. I feel like I don't and that's I don't know how else to be. It's just like and I think I think just being genuine that way, I think that goes a long ways in having like an authentic relationship with your athletes or with your fellow coaches or your peers or your friends or whatnot. And I don't think you need to be any different. Like just be who you are. You don't have to be. I think a lot is you see this a lot with young coaches where they come in and they got to be dictators. They got to like assert their authority and whatnot. And I just think it's just like too, I don't know. if I did that, it'd be fake, it'd just be too phony. Like I got to be who I am. whether it's good or bad, that's all I can be. And I think I think that's important in life. And then, especially when you're mentoring people too, is just being who you are, whether it's you have some flaws or not, but just like relating to people in an honest way. That's all it is. I don't think it has to be, it's not anything I think about like, oh, I'm going to go to this new program and I'm going to change this, this, and this. I just say I'm who I am, and I'm gonna go there, and I'm gonna work with the athletes, and if it doesn't go well, I'm gonna sit them down and be like, hey, let's figure this out. Like there's no pass fail here. There's just the constant process of figuring things out and just relating to people in a genuine, authentic way. You're gonna have good days, you're gonna have bad days, and that's just what it is. And so that's yeah, I don't know. It's such like a simple thing. It's hard to even like put words to, but I think that's the main thing is just like learning to have empathy, learning to put yourself in the shoes of another person, and then just being yourself and relating to people in a at least trying to be authentic type of way and it's just real that way. I don't know how else to say it. Yeah.
I love it. So, um, there's like, I think there's multiple times I saw you sit down with athletes and
Yeah.
sincerely care about them, like ask how they feel, how was their day, and if the athlete feel bad, you just sit there and like just care about them. I love that.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, that's at the end of the day, like I think it's important to like keep in mind that like we're sport coaches, right, Eric? Like we work with athletes for a sport. We're trying to get them to perform, right? But at the end of the day, like in the grand scheme of life as a whole, like it's just sports, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I love it, you love it. Like we're obsessed with it. You and I are always talking about 1080 or Kaiser squat, right? We're talking about all these very technical type things, but I mean, at the end of the day, it's like being a decent person is the most important thing, right? It's not
Yeah.
like your knowledge of velocity-based training zones is it's cool, it's awesome, it's good for your profession, but I think being a decent human being, or at least maybe like striving to be a decent human being, is just infinitely more important than that. And I think it's important to like keep that perspective in mind. Like, I think sometimes coaches like we get so lost in our profession, like we kind of it's easy to lose that. And I'm very, very guilty of that. It's especially like if an athlete starts struggling, it's like easy to blame them or think like, oh, I can't fix them. But no, I mean, all you can do is give it a shot and keep trying to figure it out. And like, if an athlete's struggling, you just gotta keep talking, keep conversating, keep communicating, keep trying. What else is there to do? There's nothing else to do. And like even if the whole year goes by and they still struggle, like, hey, that's not gonna prevent me from continuing to try and figure it out. And so yeah, I think that's kind of at the heart of it.
Nice, nice. Like that. So, uh, I'm gonna jump into probably a more practical or more like related to uh programming or whatever it
Yeah,
is.
yeah. We're gonna get
So,
into the technical stuff, not the
yeah.
personal stuff now. Yep.
So, I know you're at Loyola at the beginning, and then
Yep.
New Mexico, and
Yep.
then now you're at Louisville. You got Kaiser, you use Force Plate, you got
Mhm.
1080. But before this, you don't have all those protect, but
Correct.
you're still able to produce like great athletes. They got good record. How did you do that without those technology?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think you as a coach, you have to be very adaptable. Like that's if there's anything I learned at Loyola, it's resilience and then adaptability are the two, and creativity would be the three like cornerstones I feel like I learned in a very profound way during my time at Loyola is those three things. And that adaptability is like I think at New Mexico, what I gained that I never had before was I had its facilities. That's the main thing. Like at New Mexico, We had a beautiful outdoor track, state of the art, and then maybe one of the best indoor tracks on the planet as well. And so that's what I gained, but I lost all training technology. We literally had zero training technology. We didn't even have tendos. We didn't have any kind of velocity-based training devices in the weight room. Nothing. I didn't have timing gates until the very end of my second year there, where, I with most of the athletes, we had kind of progressed out of max velocity into more speed endurance space stuff. So I only really used it with like two athletes, the timing gates. So, for the most of the time there, I didn't have any training technology whatsoever. And so really, I mean, you have to adapt as a coach. Like at Loyola, I got really attuned to using the 1080. I had Brower timing gates. We had Tendo devices in the weight room that we used every week. And so I got like really immersed into using that. And my strength coach, Dave Vitale, who's still there, who's a tremendous, tremendous coach. Like we would communicate on like how to program and develop with all this technology. And I think that was really helpful in how I was able to have some success at Loyola. But going to New Mexico, it's like I had to kind of shift my mindset. I had to shift and think about things differently. And I couldn't use data at all. The only data I had was a stopwatch, my handheld stopwatch, or a measuring tape to measure a jump or something like that. And so that was it. And so yeah, I think you have to adapt as a coach. Like I just learned to I think I learned to train my eye and my intuition better. And so I just like watched and watched the movement, kind of projected what I thought was the right decision within practice in terms of learning when to push an athlete more or back an athlete off. I think just watching movement and seeing when that's like a little off. Uh, Definitely asking the athletes tons of questions all the time, getting feedback from them, and trusting that they're gonna give me honest feedback too. Uh, and so yeah, I think that's a huge part of it is just a lot of decision making, a lot of watching the movement, a lot of conversating, communicating with the athletes, trusting they're giving me honest feedback and just using my best judgment. That's really it, right? It's just kind of watching everything and using my best judgment in terms of programming, when to go to a plan B option on a workout, which I did with like the 400 guys quite often. If I watched the warm up and I didn't like what I was seeing, I would usually ask them like, "Hey, how you feeling today? What do you think about this session?" And if they sometimes I just read their body language more than I'd read what they say, and then I would, if they weren't ready for a huge speed endurance session, I'd just back off to tempo training. It was a simple thing that I would do quite often if I had to, and so yeah, it was kind of like I was the techie guy at Loyola. By the end of my time at Loyola, I was very techie. Maybe not necessarily early in my days at Loyola, but by the end I was. And then at New Mexico, it was just more like just more intuition, coaching eye, a lot of communication with the athletes, and it worked. Like that's why I think like technology is great. I love it. I'm using it extensively at Louisville, but it's not the end all be all. And so it's I think you can get a lot more precision with your training with the technology and you can track adaptation really well. But certainly it's not a requirement for elite coaching. I mean the two best years of my coaching career by a mile were at New Mexico. I mean, certainly I worked with pretty high level athletes there, but I also use zero technology in it. So it's hard to say like, oh man, if you don't have a 1080, you can't be successful. That's not true.
Yeah,
Or yeah, you have to have a Kaiser in order to be a great program. Not true.
yeah,
It's definitely helpful. I would recommend it. I would strongly recommend if you have the resources to buy these training devices, I would strongly recommend you invest in, say a 1080 or a Kaiser or some velocity based equipment. I think just because you can get the precision of training, you can track adaptation really well. You can know exactly when to cut a workout. You can target very specific adaptations at various resistances, for example. And so it's just like I would just say like with training technology, it's a lot more precise, but not a like if you have a really good coaching eye and you have good like judgment and a lot of experience and a lot of self-reflection on your training, like I said about the like the note taking after every practice, like you can kind of train yourself to have proper decision making within practice every day and within your holistic programming. So yeah, just like definitely like very different experience from Loyola to New Mexico and even from New Mexico to here to Louisville is felt very, very different to me. Yeah.
Yeah, I like it. Know what is interesting? Like, I think it's 2 weeks ago, a week ago or 2 weeks ago, I talked to Stu McMillan.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
He said the exact
Man,
same thing you said. Like,
really? Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
exact same thing he said. Like, when it comes to coaching, you feel like uh the first technology coaches have is their stopwatch. And
Yeah.
and that's all. And he thinks that nowadays people rely too much on uh sport techs. They lose they lose, they don't know how to watch movement, they don't know how to like, yeah, how to like just care about the athlete from them. I love that. And I don't know if it's because you came from a trap background, I got a trap background, so I
Mm.
mean, cutting volumes or cutting the program is so important sometimes. For
You
me,
have to.
I feel like if the athlete don't do well, the the movement's not well, I'm gonna cut it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Go to a backup option. That's
Yeah,
why I think like the more experience you have, like, okay, you always have in the back of your mind, like, I could go to plan B, I could go to plan C or D. And so like you always have that sort of like backup option, if you will. That's like, I
yeah,
mean, those emails I send every Sunday that you're on, like I always have that supplementary training document. And it's just like, it's like a tiered system of, okay, we can go to this, we
yeah,
can go to this, we can go to this. No problem doing that. We don't have to stick to the plan. It's not an end all be all. It's about training. You have to train hard to get to be good, right? But you also have to train smart as well. And
yeah,
so I think it's really like a balance there. But one more thing I'd say about the technology now is it's sort of like it's like a twofold thing here. Like on the one hand, you always hear coaches saying like, "Oh, technology is the devil." You have to beware of technology. I'm not that. Like, I hate it when coaches say that. That to me says that like they're probably like lazy or intimidated to use technology. And so that's what I think of. So I think like you'd be crazy. Like if you have a 1080 sprint, you don't use it. You're nuts. You're out of your
yeah,
mind. It's an insanely good tool, right? And so like that's why I think like if you had technology or if you had the resources to purchase this really elite technology that fortunately we have here at Louisville, I think you should do it and you should find an appropriate way to utilize it. But you shouldn't rely all of your coaching existence on it either, right? Like I do agree that there is a danger in that. Like I told that to I think I told that to Adam just not that long ago, maybe a month ago or something that I can't remember if you were there, but uh like I've been working the 1080 resisted
yeah,
Excel all right, working it every Monday, very uniformly, tracking the numbers, like making a ton of progress. And then by like somewhere like early mid-November, the numbers started like really falling off. And then I remember the day I was watching it, I was looking at the numbers. I'm like, wow, this is pretty bad. And then I was watching like the unresisted Excels that day too. Like I'm working the 1080, they do the resisted Excel and then they do the unresisted Excel uh, next to me, and I'm like watching. I'm like, wow, that looks bad. And then it started to dawn on me like, when was the last time I was like directly coaching acceleration? Because at the start of the year, that's like we weren't using the 1080 yet, and I was on them. I was just like camped out at the acceleration where we were doing Excels. And I was just cueing this athlete to do this, cueing this athlete to do that, explaining how it's supposed to feel, coaching, 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 coaching. And then once I started using the 1080, like I don't have anyone to run the machine for me, so I'm doing it. That's where I need you, Eric, the performance guy, to run the machine for me
I'll
eventually.
run
That's
it.
where we're working on it today to get you, get you right, get
I'll
you
run it.
because that'll help me because then we're working the 1080 and I'm able to coach. You see, like, now you're doing both, and that's where you really strike the gold with it. But this fall, it dawned on me in that moment, kind of, it must have been like November 8, 9, 10, 11, somewhere in there. I remember that day and it really hit me. I'm like, oh my God, like I haven't coached Excel in like 4 weeks. And so then like after that, I put the 1080 aside, and then our next two or three Excel sessions was no resisted, just plain unresisted Excels. And I was just kind of refreshing all the queuing and the technical components of acceleration. And it only took like one session to get everyone moving right again because it was all in there. They just kind of had like missed a few pieces after a few weeks, and so that's where I think like there's danger is like if you're just punching a tablet and looking at numbers and you're not actually maybe setting up the environment to produce the movement you want if you're using environmental cues like tape lines or something like that, or if you're just giving verbal cues as well. Like you get, the technique can really fall off after a while. It'll stabilize if you've done your work. It'll hold for a while, but like, if you all of a sudden, 4 weeks goes by and you're not really cueing it, then it can scale off a lot. So I'm never gonna say technology is the devil. If you told me at the start of my career I would be able to track ground contact times on a force plate and peak power outputs on a Kaiser squad or velocity for a 5 meter zone on a 30 meter resisted excel like that I'd be like this is the future. Like this is unbelievably this is insane, and so I think we need to like we should not downplay how valuable this is,
Yeah.
but also have to like keep it in moderation to some degree.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely want to be clear about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. It's like, but I do want to like summarize it in this way. I think that this is from NBA strength coach Joey Davy. When
Okay.
we do the podcast, he said that uh be a good coach first,
Yeah.
then then learn how to use technology.
Mm.
Learn how to watch movement first, then learn how to use technology.
Spot
That'll
on.
help.
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
appropriate. Like train yourself, train your mind and your
Your
heart.
coaching eye.
Be a coach, and
Yeah.
then add the technology as a nice component and a tool that you can utilize where you see fit as well. But most important is you developing your coaching ability,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Love that. So, uh, from the previous conversation, you also mentioned that like coaching cue, and from what I saw, you implement a lot of like external cue.
Yeah, definitely.
How do you decide like when to use external, when to use internal?
Wow, that's a great question. Yeah, I think with especially early in the season, it's a lot of like verbal cueing, if you will. I'll separate it as verbal and environmental cueing, if you will. And so I think it's important that athletes understand what technically sound movement and acceleration or max velocity or a triple jump, a long jump, a high jump. I think it's important that they understand fundamental biomechanical model, if you will. Obviously it's got to tinker a bit for each individual. And so I think like early in the season, I'm doing a lot more verbal cueing, but I'm very big on minimal verbal cueing. Like I don't talk a lot at practice. And that's not laziness. For the love of God, it is not. This is intentional because I think it's a bigger words are powerful. And if all of a sudden you start talking way too much to athletes, And then it just like they get all confused. They start
Yeah.
thinking too much. They're thinking 15 things while they're trying to do a long jump, and then it just all goes to crap, right? And so I think if you're a coach, you have to be very, very intentional and very specific about exactly what you're saying. You have to keep it to like one thing. I've often heard it said you could do one or two things. You could cue one or two things, but I try to just do like one thing. And then once I see that stabilized, maybe I'll add on a second thing. And so I
Yeah.
think it's really, really important that you don't say too much. Like, because coaches, like us coaches, like, look, I'm rambling my tail off right now. Like we could talk and we can talk and we can talk about everything under the sun when it comes to training and coaching and technique and cueing, right? And so our disposition is to talk and express our thoughts because there's like a part of us that wants everything to be fixed at once. And we have to understand that we have to put ourselves in the shoes of the athlete who doesn't understand, hasn't been studying biomechanics for 25 years, right? They're probably has studied biomechanics for 0 years. And a lot of them maybe didn't even have any kind of triple jump coach in high school, right? And so it's important that you understand the level of understanding that the athlete is at, and you have to meet them at that level and communicate minimally and extremely effectively. And so a lot of time I kind of balance the both. I think triple jump's a perfect example for environmental and verbal cueing. Like obviously we'll work on landing flat-footed, we'll work on swinging segments and posture, like all the Bushexnator stuff that is triple jump 101, right? And that's really important. And athletes have to understand that. We could go into more nuanced type stuff like free leg in the first phase and whatnot, but and I'll coach him on these things for a while. But once I see like some technique is start to stabilize, I might kind of revert to environmental cues. And so, like for example, in triple jump, I have this like phase distribution chart. So I think you've seen that like where I put the tape measure from the
Yeah.
board to the
Yeah.
pit, and I'll put the cones down. Like you've seen me do that. And so it's just a chart I got the idea of it from Nick Peterson many years ago. And then I've kind of extrapolated it from there. And so I'll put down the cones of like what I kind of want them to jump in, say, a short approach jump, or where I think they should be on that given day, depending on if it's like, oh, we're being competitive, we're trying to hit a big jump, or maybe we're specifically just working on certain technical cues. But the overarching point here is like in that situation for environmental cueing for the triple jump, I could put those cones down and I'd just be like, all right, Rachel, just jump to the cones. I don't really say anything else. Like, because a lot of time that cleans up the posture, it cleans up the flat footed contact, it gets them to connect the first to second phase quite well. And so that's where like I think you got to balance the verbal and the environmental cueing. But honestly, in my experience, as the more I've gone into coaching, it's the environment, like learning how to really set up a great environmental cue or the right environment to produce the movement you want is so much more effective than you constantly like cueing the athlete. It could take like a month to get a certain verbal cue down, but it could take one practice sometimes if you get the environment set up correctly. That's a
True.
bit of an overstatement or exaggeration, but I think as a coach, it's important to understand both. And I'm always like trying to tinker with the environmental stuff to produce the movement that I'm looking for.
Nice, nice. One thing, man, I'm learning from you a lot. I still a lot of stuff from
My guy.
So I have to say that the more coaches I talk to, the more elite coaches or the coaches who train elite athletes, they have like tons of experience. Like they said the same thing. Just like man, it's like the same thing that Stu McMillan said
Mhm.
or other coaches said. They try to speak less, they try to talk
Definitely.
less.
Yep.
They try to speak on one thing, just one thing.
Yep.
It's exactly the same thing. And I saw you did that multiple times. Just try to focus on one thing for you try to talk less.
Yep.
I love
'Cause
that.
you can confuse the like you have to understand like there's there's a perception. I'm talking very philosophically now, but if you're an athlete, if you're say like you're an 18-year-old kid, you're an athlete and you come into a college program, like you come to Louisville, you're in the ACC Power Five, and there's a coach here, you're gonna be like, wow, that's the D1 coach. I should listen to everything he says, right? There's gonna be a perception of that. And so they're gonna like take everything you say very literally, very seriously. And so it'd be so easy to overwhelm them with information. And that's why I think you have to be very careful about how much you're verbalizing to an athlete because less is so much more. It's like, hey man, just get this one thing down. Like Jaden, just get tall at the takeoff. That's it. Or I'll just put a little wicket in the way, like, hey, jump over this hurdle. And that's all I'm gonna say, you know,
Love it.
and so if I start telling him about like takeoff angles and brushing the board away and all these tiny little incremental things. It's just I'm just gonna ruin his development, you know, especially when he's that young. Like he needs the proper cueing and minimal cueing to to let those fundamental things like really settle in. And that sets him up for down the road. And so I think, yeah, less is so much more with verbal cueing. And sometimes a lot of time with jumps, like I won't even say hardly anything for like three or four jumps. Like, okay, you know, maybe if it's a technique day, you know, we do a couple drills to prep and then maybe get your mark down from whatever the distances we're going, 8 steps, hit a takeoff or like hit some takeoffs. Maybe I'll give him a cue or two for the takeoff. And then, you know, then we'll start landing it. And I'll give him a cue and I'll let him jump, take 3 or 4 attempts, let them sometimes they'll come to me, sometimes they won't. And if they come to me, a lot of time I'll just won't even say anything. I'll just see what they say. Because I want them to like figure it out. I don't want to like hold their hand through everything. Like I need them to go through the process of figuring out what the jump is supposed to feel like. You know, like you see this, it's almost like if you're around Trey Burns right now, like you could see it in real time because it's like after every attempt, like he's starting to figure out what it's supposed to feel like versus what it's not supposed to feel like, right? It's like a really cool process to see unfold right before our eyes, right? And um, so yeah, so I think like it's you have to let the athletes like fend for themselves a little bit too. Like you gotta let them screw some reps up. Those are the most important ones. They're most valuable ones. And let them kind of like come over to you and kind of verbalize what they're feeling. Let them get it out of their system and work through it. And then like maybe after a few reps, you make an intervention and maybe I'll say something, or maybe I'll change the environment a little bit. I'll put a wicket out, I'll add a mat, I'll put a high jump bungee in the sand pit, or you know, whatever, or a cone to jump to, or whatever. And so that's what I think like I guess what it comes down to is you don't want to stunt the personal developmental process or learning process of the athlete, right? Let that kind of gestate, if you will, for lack of a better term. Like let it marinate, let that soil kind of get soaked so something can kind of slowly grow out of it. You know what I mean? Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, if I want to like, I don't know if you like it, but I meant to, this is a complimentary for you. I mean, all that stuff you just mentioned is basically, I think it's basically what Rob Gray from uh
Okay.
Arizona State University or France
Okay.
Boss talk about how the brain learn. I mean, that's
Yeah.
what
Yep.
that's you basically just said all those things. That's just what it is.
It's like dynamic systems theory and practical
Yeah.
application, essentially, is what I'm
Yeah.
telling you. The whole idea of self-organization, like the coach sets up the environment, give a
Yeah.
cue, a verbal cue or two, then you kind of let the athlete solve the problem of
Yeah.
the environment and the task you give them, right? It's like self-organization and
Yeah.
real time practical application of
Yeah.
dynamic systems theory, essentially is what
Yeah.
I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
So, uh, since you brought up like dynamic system theory, um,
Did I see Geo back there? Is that
yeah,
Geo? What's up, Geo?
yeah.
Hey, when are
So,
we getting I want to Eric the Performance Guy podcast with Geo. When did it happen?
all right, we're gonna do it sometime. We're gonna do it sometime.
That's
So,
right.
I'm gonna go back to since you talk about like since you brought up dynamic system theory, I
Yeah.
noticed that you implement uh France boss stuff a lot. I'm not gonna
Yeah.
say a lot. You implement it, and personally, after I use it, I feel like I move much better. So,
Yeah.
how and why did you start implementing it at the first place? And what did you see over all those years?
Yeah, yeah. So, kind of going back to what I'd said about my time at Loyola, once again, I'm in 12 years, predominantly in a small hallway in the concourse arena of on the concourse of Gentile Arena, the basketball stadium. Just a couple slabs of rollout track, and I'm in this like 12-year mode of like how can I maximize this environment? How can I get 25-foot long jumpers? How can I get guys to break 21 seconds in the 200, girls over 20 feet in the long jump, blah, 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 right? And so, I'm searching for every possible avenue, any tiny morsel of incremental improvement I can squeeze out of this garbage environment, if you will. It really sucked, to be honest. But that's just what I had. I don't have a choice here. I can't get around it. And so that's when it pushed me to do the USTF CCCA coaching ed curriculum, listen to every talk Boo has ever given, or get on Altus or Altus Connect it's called now, and listen to everything I possibly can, do every online course I can, read every book I can, take extensive notes every day, refining the process of getting better. And one of my answers to that solution of trying to maximize that hallway there was I'm going to look into coordination-based strength. That was one of my things that I latched onto back in like 2017. I read I think it was 2017 into 2018. I read the Bosch running book. I read strength training and coordination. I read it 2 times. Just I couldn't put it down. It was so riveting to me. And so like refreshing this look at movement in a different way like that. It like really piqued my interest. Because I feel like a lot of like athletic development books it's kind of like all the same thing. It's sort of boring. It's like after once you've been in the profession for 20 years, it's kind of like you see a lot of like the same thing over and over again. But this was like it's so like refreshing and new and different, and it seemed like it had a lot of merit for me. And so I got like really deep into it for back then in that 2017-18 time frame. And I somehow I don't know how I found it, but I saw that Bosch was doing like these in-person seminars, and he'd mostly do it in like Australia, New Zealand. He would obviously in Europe too, because he's that's where he's from, but rarely does he ever come to the US. And then I saw there was this he was coming to the University of North Carolina in 2018. And at that time I was a head coach at Loyola. So the person in charge of the budget is this guy. So I could do whatever I wanted. And so, I booked my plane ticket, I booked my spot in there because it was like limited spots. There's about maybe 30 coaches in it. And then I flew out there December 2018 and spent a week out there and the University of North Carolina, and just yeah, it was one of the best coaching education experiences I've ever had. So that's sort of like the genesis of how I got into it and how I got to utilize it. But then in terms of implementation, yeah, I kind of like took on a lot of different forms throughout the years, but kind of where I'm at now, just to get into it more is I focus primarily on hip lock because that's sort of like the main attractor being sort of like that's what you train in coordination based strength is attractors or attractor states where it's like universal components of human movement or core components of human movement. And hip lock is probably like the primary one that can apply to virtually every sport. And attractors is a very convoluted topic to get into, so I'm not going to get into it because there's like global attractors, there's local attractors, there's different sets of attractors for agility-based sports versus running-based sports, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I do think it's probably appropriate to say that hip lock is the primary attractor, and so that's what I focus most of my coordination-based strength on in developing that. And so yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different ways I could explain how we utilize it, but I do want to say from the outset, I'm not like a full-fledged coordination-based strength guy. And so the way I utilize it might be sort of bastardized in a way. So I will admit that. Like I do traditional strength training. Like I do absolute strength, right? I do rate of force development. I do heavy cleans. I do fast cleans. There's periods of time where we do squat, and so like if you're hardcore into coordination-based strength, you might not do those things. Maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't. But I treat coordination-based strength as like an ancillary component of strength training. It's like it's one category that I utilize, and I utilize it almost every day, whether the main thing we do that day, but most of the time it's just like one or two activities at the end of the session. And so yeah, so the way I see it is coordination-based strength is sort of like a very versatile category that could be applied on a neural day, like a big neuromuscular training day. It could be applied on a general day, which is a non-specific recovery-based type day, or it could be applied on an extensive day, where it's more technical, sub-maximal, very specific type work. That being the USTFCCCA like coaching ed curriculum where you label the days as neural, general, or extensive for those that aren't familiar. Adam uses that, as do I. That all comes from Boo, essentially. And so I use that framework. I label all my days as neural, general, extensive. But the cool part about coordination-based strength is I see that as like being a versatile category that could fit in to any of those 3 days. And so that's where I see it as like this unique component of strength training that could be applied anywhere. Um, but typically I I divvy it up in terms of like general versus neural. And so like if it involves like foot plant from above or like swing leg retraction, which are also attractors that are definitely related to hip lock, probably couldn't even be done without hip lock. Uh, those are going to involve a lot of like reactive ankle stiffness. And so I kind of see that as like a plyometric. So that fits into a neural day in my brain. And so I typically apply those on neural days. So if it's like a max velocity switches with the water bag on the shoulders or like an acceleration switches, you've seen those many times out on the track. Those are going to be on neural days. But if it's more like a single leg clean or a single leg snatch where it's very intense hip lock activity, that doesn't have the pounding of a reactive ankle stiffness, I'm going to shift that more so on a general day, because there's no pounding involved. And then a lot of the time on those general days, instead of say like a general strength circuit that you might do within the USTF CCCA curriculum on a general day, you might do a bodybuilding circuit or a general strength circuit. A lot of the time I'll do a coordination based strength circuit or series, and that's where we're doing probably like 3 forms of hip lock. We're probably doing some trunk integrity type stuff. And it can be, if you do it right, it's quite hard, as you know, like you'll work up a good sweat. So that's kind of like how I roughly frame it and utilize it within the program. But generally speaking, I think of coordination based strength as you're training force closure. So you're training co-contractions. Say like in a hip lock, you're training uh simultaneous co-contraction between the agonist and antagonist muscles around the stance leg, around the hip of the stance leg to free up frontal plane motion in the free leg. That's essentially the definition of a hip lock. But by training the co-contractions around the hip, you're training the body to channel forces optimally. And so, like, when I think of neural training in general, or training in general, really, I think of training the human body to produce force. I'm training the body to channel forces optimally. And then I think of training the body to transmit forces optimally, if you will. So you have force production, force closure, and force transmission. And so, like, I always am making sure, like, within a given week, I'm training those three things in a good way. Like, and that's force production is like, to me, producing force, probably mostly like static lifting, like tripod deadlift. It could be a squat or something like that. Like you're producing forces, becoming more forceful. And then force closure is training co-contractions or training the body to channel forces optimally. It's sort of like I just recorded a talk for TFC on coordination-based strength, and I had a video comparing a garden, though, the pressure and the direction of water in a garden hose where it sprays in like 100 directions. The force is very medium versus a water jet cutter where it's very focused in one direction and it's so powerful that it can cut through 3-inch aluminum steel. Or I don't know, is aluminum steel the right word? Or aluminum, I'll say. And so that's like the idea is like the garden hose is like your hip without co-contraction or hip lock or trained hip lock, and then the water jet cutter is like your hip on hip lock, where you have trained co-contractions. That's sort of how I see it. Um, and then like force transmission, just to kind of complete the thought there, is just training reactivity. And so those forces produced around the hip are channeled through co-contraction and then expressed into the ground through ankle stiffness, if that makes sense.
Yeah, love it. So, uh, since like channeling or like producing co-contraction is so important, um, I know you implemented like co-contraction, hold it there for like 1 second, 2 second, then drop.
Right. Yeah,
Why
yeah,
do
yeah.
why do we why do we like while staying hip lock is so important? Why don't we just like use it, hold it for like longer or just stable there? Why do we need perturbation? And
Yeah,
why
so
just hold it there for like 2 seconds?
so if you're gonna train hip lock or if you're gonna train co-contraction, you can essentially train it through perturbations, pre-tension, or time pressure, the three P's. Now, I focus mostly, almost entirely on perturbations, which is instability. Perturbations just being, yeah, instability, destabilizing load, if you will. Um, and so there's a cool thing about coordination-based strength in theory is like if I want to train a hip lock, I can't just be like, all right, Eric, give me a hip lock, right? If I want you to do a squat, you could do a squat, right? You could just volitionally decide I'm going to do a squat, but you can't decide to do a hip lock. It's not like a volitional thing. Uh, in order to train it, you have to like the coach has to like coax it out of the athlete. I have to like sort of like push it out of you. You know what I mean? And the only way to do that, not the only way, but the main way to do that is through destabilizing load and very specific coordinated movements. So you kind of combine those two things. So like with a single leg clean, very simple example, you go into a single leg RDL, pause for a second, swing up as hard as you can, and then your foot's going to float above the box as long as you can, and then you hit on the box, right? And maybe you got a water bag on your shoulders, for example. And so the way that's how you'll train the co-contraction is the destabilizing load on your shoulders with, say, the water bag, the high intent of swinging up really, really fast. So the destabilizing load is creating some chaos. And then you have to float above the box in the end of the range of motion. because you've kind of exhausted the frontal plane movement or of the swing leg, and you've created almost like a triple extension off the stance leg. And it's that floating above the box. It's not necessarily, oh, 2 seconds then go down. It's hold it as long as you can until you hit the ground. And so it's in that moment where you're floating above the box after the high intense swing of the leg up and the water's splashing around and you actively trying to hold that foot above the box in the air, floating in the air. That's when the hip lock is sort of like coaxed out of the athlete and trained, stimulated out of the athlete, if you will. And so that's really that's kind of the interesting thing about hip lock is like you can't just volitionally do it. Like you have to create this environment that pulls it out of the athlete. And the other thing is like if an athlete is doing single leg cleans and their intent is high and they're just repping it out, no problem, that they're probably not getting a hip lock because it's too easy. It's not destabilizing and forcing them to co-contract around the hip and stabilize. You stabilize by co-contracting. And so if the move easy with the water bag, then you as a coach might have to be like, okay, we're gonna not have the water bag on the shoulders and instead put the water bag in front of you and then swing it above your head and go to a single leg snatch. That would be harder because the destabilizing load is further away from the body now. And then if you see him start to struggle with it, like you remember that day Jeremiah was trying to do that and he was like kind of falling all over the place. But it's like he would get two right, he would nail it for two, and then the third one he'd fall over. That was perfect. That was exactly what you want. Like you want it to be very challenging. And so there's a sense in which a 70% success rate is like 100% effort. You know what I mean? Because you need that they need to be challenged enough where they have some success, but they're also like struggling to handle the destabilizing load. We also don't want it to be so challenging that every rep is a failure. That's also a waste of time. That's just like overkill, right? And so that like if you're implementing coordination-based strength, you have to kind of find that sweet spot where you can see they're struggling a bit, but they're still having some success. And then if you know if they nailed the single leg clean on the shoulders, then you have then move to a snatch and then work that for a while. And then once you've seen that they really hold true with their stability on that movement, then maybe you go to a shake at the top. So there's always like ways to keep adding variety to the movement, to keep adding challenge to it. And that's sort of the hard thing with coordination-based strength is like you do have to have a fair amount of attention to what the athletes are doing to make sure they're getting something out of it. Because if they're just kind of going through the motions and the intent is low, it's a waste of time. It's just fluff. It's just they're getting nothing out of it. Or if the intent is high, but the challenge is low, also fluff. It's not really, it's like a waste of time, you know? And so that's why, doing it with bigger groups is kind of hard, but doing it with smaller groups is sort of like the sweet spot. But, not everyone has that luxury all the time. But hopefully I answered your question. I talked a lot there.
No, I love it. Love it. Can you repeat that? The 3P, what is the 3P?
Yeah, so the way to train co-contraction is through perturbations. That's the primary way. That's what I do almost exclusively. Because if you think about it in the world of track and field, everything we do is very uniform. There's no unpredictability at all. You just run in a straight line or run in a straight line and jump or run through a curve and jump over a bar. It's the same thing all the time. It's not like American football where I got to respond to a 310-pound guy trying to kill me. That's very different, right? And so I do think like in track and field, it specifically, especially because you don't get any unpredictability, like the training of co-contractions can be quite low for track and field athletes. And that's why I think perturbations is really, really, really important that you give them as a coach because they don't get it anywhere. Right. And so that's why I think perturbations is like that's really all I focus on. But you could do it through pre-tension as well, like maybe band resisted type work where you're creating more tension type work. But even doing a lot of switching activities involves pre-tension or being doing switching activities on a slightly elevated surface involves a faster swing leg retraction. That's another way to do it. Or maybe if I push down on your shoulders and then you did like a some like a single leg clean or a switching type movement, that would be pre-tension. Or you could do time pressure. So that's the three: pressure, time, pressure, perturbations, and pre-tension are the three P's. That's how you train co-contraction. You could do activities where you do all three or just or two or one. I focus almost entirely on perturbations because we don't get that in the world of track and field at all. So I have to give that to them, right? Um, so yeah.
Love it, love it. So last thing, I know we discussed this before, and both of you and me are like a big acceleration guy, especially you. Before I came to Louisville, what I do is like 5 reps or like 10 reps, no, 5 reps or like 8 reps of acceleration, then tempo.
Okay.
A few sets of acceleration, then tempo. But after I come here, everything I did is acceleration, acceleration, acceleration. And,
You
man,
do, man. You're the king of 20-meter excels.
So
You guys like the two people that listen to this podcast, you got to understand that Eric, the performance guy, without fail, 7 a.m. He's on the track. He's got the cone set up. He's got on his SP2s, and he's cranking some 20-meter excels. It's
so so I know of this kind of discussed it before. So if athlete they don't have like good acceleration, we're gonna train the shit out of them. Like just do acceleration, right? Just do
100%.
acceleration. Yeah. So
Yep.
and you're
Absolutely.
you're a big short to long guy. So
100%.
so um can you explain like why is that? Like why is acceleration so important and why short to long?
Yeah. So yeah, first part, why is acceleration so important? I mean, that's like the foundation of speed power events in track and field in the world that I work in is being able to build momentum through the sprint. That sets you up for max velocity for a 100-meter dash or even for the 400, for the long jump, triple jump, high jump. You have to be able to produce momentum to carry you down the track, and you have to be able to push yourself into the proper hip position to set you up for max velocity down the track in whatever event it is. So, and then furthermore, I think max velocity is sort of like the king of neural training, and certainly you'll get the biggest stimulus out of max velocity. But the limiting factor of max velocity is like you just can't do a whole lot of it. You can't like if we're doing fly tens, it's not like we're doing 12 of them, right? I mean, you can only do, I mean, most of the time guys will do two or three, and that's probably it. I mean, maybe you can get some people to do four. I don't know if I've ever had someone do five, maybe once or twice. But like acceleration, like I mean, like you said, you can train the shit out of it. Like you can do reps and reps and reps. I've had athletes do very high quality acceleration up to 600 meters total, which is a lot of that takes like 2 hours to do. Now that's not too normal, but like you can just do a lot of it. It's pretty safe, very low injury risk, but it's just great power development. It's great reactivity, great coordination and rhythm and timing development. It'll bleed into everything else you do, whether it's further aspects of speed training, but especially in the weight room, especially with your plyometrics, your ability to produce accelerated power and build momentum affects everything. And so I do admit that like max velocity is the king of neural stimuli, but the limiting thing with max velocity, you just can't do a lot of it. And so, but the plus side with acceleration, you can do it. You can do so much of it. And so you can get greater adaptation that way. Um, it's a very trainable quality, and that's one thing I really like about it. And so yeah, we're doing that all the time. Like you've seen us do many acceleration workouts and we just hammer away at it, especially this time, or I mean, we're kind of in December now, so we're advancing and progressing the speed training, but you're talking like August, September, October into November. We're hammering every week, every Monday. We're just cranking away at acceleration. Because it just yeah, the motor unit recruitment you get out of it, the reactivity, the ankle stiffness, the accelerative power, the strength of everything around the hip, the glutes, the hip flexors and everything. Like, I mean, it's just endless, like the adaptation you can get from it. But kind of the segue into the second part of your question, why short to long? Um, it just makes sense to me. I don't know. It's just like if I'm gonna build a skyscraper, I can't build it all at once. I have to build it like one story at a time, right? And so to me, it's just like that's how the human body learns and develops is you kind of incrementally extend and nurture and grow things over time. And so like at TFC this weekend, I gave a talk on the 400 and like how we developed 400 sprinters at New Mexico because we had a really good group there. I like looked it up the other day and we were only the second mid-major in NCAA history to ever produce three 45-second guys in the same year. Only us in North Carolina A&T have ever done that majors. And so, it's like we had some good success there, right? And so I talked a lot about like how we extended the speed and built a faster race model by like we went through our acceleration, a lot of acceleration work, and then we progressed into max velocity work. And sometime like late October, we got into race modeling. And so we're working on the first portions of the race, building a faster race model. And so the first time we did a 180. Then the second time we did it, we did a 190. Third time we did a 210. And so you see, like we're just building. The way I thought of it back then was like I was trying to get guys that never run 45 to run 45 in the first time for the first time in their life, right? And so I was like gradually constructing a 45-second 400 10 meters at a time over the course of a season. And so that's why it made sense in my head to like go short to long is like you have to think about speed. Speed is the most important thing. And that how can I nurture the speed into slightly longer efforts? And that's why I always think short to long is you build these smaller pieces and then you nurture it into longer pieces, which is just more and more specificity. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Love it, love it. Man, before I come to Louisville, the last podcast I did, I think that was good. That was great. But
Mhm.
after I came here, I get the chance
You're
to
on.
watch how you
You
coach.
got all the superstars on there.
No, no, no. I need to learn a lot from you. I really get the chance to watch how you coach, man. I'm like, man, this guy's smarter than I thought. This guy is super smart.
What do you think, man? You think I'm an idiot? Come on
No,
now.
no, no. I mean, I mean, no, I'm just like, man, this guy's like super smart.
Oh, I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Yeah, no, I think I've made so many mistakes over the years. I've probably, I think if anything, I'm good at learning from my mistakes. So that's a huge part of it.
So, uh, for all those who are interested in what we're talking about today, where can they reach out to you? Man, you're smart.
Yeah, I mean, you can find me on social media or, yeah, I always want to say Twitter, but it's X now. But it sounds weird, like, oh, find me on X. Well, it sounds kind of weird, right? Does it sound weird? You know what
Yeah.
I'm talking about, right? So you can find me on X at Bob Thurnhoffer. I'm gonna roll with it because no one says that, right? I'm like the first person to say that. Everyone's still saying Twitter. But
Yeah.
you get over it, man. Twitter is not Twitter anymore. It's X. Just accept it. I know no
Okay.
one likes it, but it's fine. But you can find me on Instagram. I'm easy to find, or you can email me at it's bob@gocards.com. We found out in August that I'm the first Bob in Louisville athletics history.
Oh,
Isn't that
real?
sweet? Yeah, that's like I'm pretty pumped about that. Because otherwise it would have been like bob2@gocards.com.
Oh,
But it's only bob@gocards.com. So first and hopefully last. There's just not very many Bobs anymore. It's like an old-fashioned American name, right? You know, like how many Bobs do you know, Eric? Do you know any others except for me?
No.
See? It's like an archaic American name, like from the 1950s or something. But I'm still going strong. I'm proud of my name. I like my name.
Good, good.
So yeah, you can find me on at Bob at gocards.com or on social media, or come to Louisville and hang out with me and Eric.
Nice, nice, nice.